Hello everyone, my name is Harshi Baldota and on behalf of Students' Council at Government Law College, Mumbai, I welcome you all to the fourth technical session of the three-day international conference on World Constitution, a new horizon of human rights. I would like to welcome our resource person for this session, Dr. Amal Sethi, a senior fellow at the University of Hamburg. We are honored by your presence, sir. I would also like to welcome our chairperson for this session, Dr. Eugenia Almand, Executive Secretary of the Provisional World Parliament. We are joined by our principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidya, and senior faculty members and students from around the globe. We will commence this technical session with a keynote address by our resource person for today, Dr. Amal Sethi, followed by presentation by 4 paper presenters and concluding with the chairperson's address. I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce our resource person for this technical session, Dr. Amal Sethi. He is a senior fellow at the University of Hamburg. He also holds visiting positions at the University of Liverpool and Harvard University. He is currently undertaking a multi-year and multi-jurisdictional project funded under the German Excellence Strategy on the design of constitutional codes, how it matters. Apart from his academic writing, Dr. Sethi has also been involved with different governmental and intergovernmental agencies ranging from USAID and US Department of Commerce to UNESCO, UNDP, UN Women, UNHCR, and SDG Fund. In addition, he has advised sovereign governments on constitutional making and at various international tribunals. Dr. Sethi obtained his master's and a doctorate in law from the University of Pennsylvania and his bachelor's in law from the Government Law College, Mumbai. We are extremely honored by your presence, sir. I now request our resource person, Dr. Amal Sethi, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Amal, special welcome to you as you are alma mater of our college.
Thank you, Dr. Vaidya. Thank you so much for having me. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So I'll try to keep this quite brief. And generally, topics like these, I would say I'll start with this one caveat. I'm a more traditional comparativist or a constitutionalist in the sense that something like a topic like world constitution, I think it's one of those topics which is very interesting in the sense that it involves kind of an influence of both domestic law as well as international law. It tries to take an idea which is generally debated and discussed more at, when we talk about constitutions, it's a very domestic thing. But there has been this in recent years, not only, with topics like this, but I always love this example that there's this journal, I think it's published by either OUP or CUP, I'm not really sure, but it's called Global Constitutionalism. And one of the kind of chief goals of that journal is pretty much to look at trends that exist in constitutionalism, but more at a global level, or rather to, kind of address the idea, do we have something that's converging? Is there some, larger theme in constitutionalism that is common across systems and across jurisdictions, etc. So, having said that, I'll first, go to the more domestic point. And often we throw around the word constitution, and we in both our, just normal discourse as well as, when we make claims to the courts, we pretty much say that this XYZ is constitutional, XYZ is not constitutional. And this pretty much goes to, one of a more fundamental question before, I really dive into things is, what's the role of a constitution? And to answer this, I really like this one definition that's that an American scholar called Mark Tushnet provides. And he says a constitution pretty much has 2 major functions. He also lists a lot of minor functions a constitution has, but his 2 major functions are, one, a constitution is kind of a statement which lists the symbolic purposes of a state, its highest aspirations, its highest values. its core fundamental objectives. And I feel this is a very important part of a constitution. I'll head to it later as to why I think this also is a very important part of the constitution. But the second, function of a constitution is pretty much to lay down the means of power sharing and organization of a government. And if you, perhaps go 100 years back and you ask constitutional scholars, especially those trained in a more British system, they would tell you the purpose of a constitution is the second thing. But if you look at most modern constitutions, especially constitutions drafted in the 21st century, also while saying that, I'll just put for your information kind of point. It's especially a lot of times when we discuss topics like constitutional reform or even just drafting new constitutions, people often ask this question that why are we talking about these topics? Like, constitutions aren't drafted all the time. One of the most fascinating things when I started the study of this subject is that, and which is something that people generally don't know, is that, and especially when we stay in a country like India or like the United States of America, or even Germany, for example, these are constitutions that have endured a fairly large time. But the average age of a constitution across all constitutions drafted from 1789, which is when the American Constitution was drafted, which is arguably the first example of the modern constitution that we have. About 100,000 constitutions have been drafted since then. And the average age of constitution is just 19.2 years. This was found in a study by three authors called James Milton, Tom Ginsburg, and Zachary Elkins in this wonderful research book called The Endurance of National Constitutions. But if we really take this since the year 2000, and more if we are looking at recent events, there were periods such as the fall of communism, the end of colonialism, the end of World War, where you suddenly saw like a lot of countries kind of changing their dynamic and drafting new constitutions. But no such event happened in the 21st century. But still in the 21st century, we've had 49 new constitutions drafted. So constitutional change is something that actually happens way more than most people think it does. So, I listed these two for purposes of a constitution. Now, I said that the first purpose, I'll kind of head to it, and that's important. So I said the first function of a constitution is pretty much to lay down a country's highest aspirations, its core values, its national identity. And what do I mean by this? And I'll potentially use the Indian example. Now, if you look at the Indian example, the constitution has certain fundamental rights that you can't violate. So that you could say that those are like core objectives of our nation as a society. And then we have certain other principles that are derived from the fundamental rights. So that's one thing. Now, highest aspirations. If we look at the preamble of the Indian Constitution, the directive principles of the Indian Constitution, you can pretty much say that these are not things that are binding on the government, but this is the kind of society the drafters of the Indian Constitution wanted to envision. And then there's the aspect of national identity, which is an often neglected thing in studying constitutions, but pretty much when constitutions are drafted, they're one of the most important things that are discussed, because drafters want to create this identity for a country. So in India, what's it? The founding fathers were very adamant that this is going to be a secular republic. It's going to have certain social leanings. It's going to be a society which will largely promote equality. So that's about the national identity. And I know I'm right now talking about a lot of domestic thing, but I do have a purpose to link it to a larger point later on. So essentially, this is the purpose of a constitution. And the second, like I said, that's more simplistic in laying down the means of power sharing, the means of organization of a society. That would mean in any society, is this a federal country? Does it have a bicameral legislator? Is it a presidential system versus a prime ministerial system? Does this country only have a Supreme Court, or does it have a dual system such as that exists in most of Europe, where you have a Supreme Court and you have a constitutional court? So these are the kind of other things the constitution does. Now, I want to head to the first point, which I said, that a constitution kind of lays down, the core objectives, national identity, highest aspirations of a country. And now let's, apply it to like a more global system. So the entire idea of a world constitution, perhaps, and they're similar, I would say there's similar arguments that exist in different forms, which are not, really termed this way, but it's towards more internationalization of rights, obligations, etc. So what are some of the core ideas that underline this? The first is a lot of people, especially, outside the United Nations system, believe that, in the current global regime that we have, is unable to address human rights adequately. And I don't disagree with that one bit. As someone, who's worked a lot in the UN system, I would call myself a very big UN critic. I do believe that that system is imperfect. That system leads to a lot of problems. And it is a very political system. Just to give an example, without really taking sides, is we often see that a resolution is about to be passed for addressing ABC problem, but one of the Security Council members would veto it. So it has been an inefficient system. There's also this other problem, and that is that the internationalization at the UN level has, so like I said, sometimes, when it comes to very major problems, the permanent 5 members don't allow things to happen. So the UN needs to justify its existence. This is an argument that, I'm taking from a scholar called Eric Posner, and I generally love this argument, and I've seen this, pretty much happening at times when I've been involved with the UN. So the UN, a lot of at major levels, it's unable to act for reasons of politics or perhaps, sometimes institutional capacity. So, but it still needs to kind of, justify that why it exists. And this is where it gets problematic. To justify where it exists, it takes these easy cases, cases where, both like intervention, supervision, etc., would be very easy. Take, for example, a civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo or state building in Afghanistan. You don't have that many people who at that stage and that place in time and space were really opposed to it. So the UN picks up these, easy cases, which are pretty much smaller jurisdictions, which it would be wrong to say that they are not as much a threat or concern of international peace and security, but they have not been very successful in addressing these macro problems, such as when the entire Syrian war happened, or even when the Afghanistan war was actually happening. The UN's involvement with Afghanistan has been a lot post 2004, and we've all seen how that ended. So this has been one like big problem with the United Nations entire system, and a lot of people call for reforms of this entire model. And this is like a larger debate where I would say the debate for world constitution somewhere comes in. Not perfect, not the most perfect, categorization, but I'm trying to, kind of take a more macro debate. Now, going back to entirely this idea of like world constitutions, and it, like I said, the first purpose of a constitution is it's more, ideational. It's more about the values premise. So the first, thing behind a world constitution, and this is pretty much what I think this session is about, it's a convergence of philosophies and ideologies. And, as much as, so before, actually I head into that. So I said like one of the entire ideas is premised on the UN system not being very successful. But the second, actually, I feel is a more greater thing that we've not really grasped reality with, is that our current systems and structures, they have been designed in such a way that we are not able to tackle some of the biggest threats that are going to happen going forward. The COVID pandemic, is a great example of that. And the COVID pandemic is something like a lot of people, even someone like me, actually thought like, oh my God, how did we reach here? But a lot of people who study biorisk, they have been warning of a COVID pandemic since ages, since pretty much, I would say 40, 50 years. There is a biologist at the University of Rutgers called Dr. Ebright, and he's been, pretty much pushing, and this is outside the legal structures, that we need a more globalized health system to respond to such things, because it's bound to happen. It can be natural or it can be man-made. But we don't have systems in place to pretty much handle a thing like a pandemic. But the pandemic is not the only thing. There are a lot of other things that you could call as existential threats that right now, our systems are not like designed to handle. Even something like climate change, which is being handled at a UN level, we're doing a very bad job of it. Then with the rise of artificial intelligence, advanced technologies, we never know like how the future would look at. And again, existential risk can arise from that. So an idea behind this to address this is a more globalized regime. And that's not a bad idea, because or rather, I would say that's an amazingly good idea, simply because, and this is another thing which surprises a lot of people, especially in like a country like India. We are very proud, and we really very talk very, I would say, positively about federalism. The problem with federalism is a great thing in a country like India, where there are divisions, but it's always important to not like, really get lost in it. India wouldn't have worked without federalism. But federalism comes with its cost. And the one very big cost that federalism or decentralization comes with is the ability to tackle problems at a slower level. Again, putting an Indian context here for like people to understand, like we see the COVID pandemic, the central government is doing something else and state governments are doing something else, leads to a lot of confusion. That's pretty much, in a very short way, that's pretty much what happens in every case. So federalism does result in a slower delivery of goods and public services. So a more, centralized, especially at a global level system, would be better to address issues. And you can see a very small, I would say, a controlled experiment of the COVID pandemic from this, about how in Europe, where the COVID pandemic, a lot of its tackling, especially vaccine distribution, is happening at a European level. Vaccine distribution has been more equitable, and it's you can't say it's happened quicker, but it's happened in a more in a way that a lot of people would say is better than what's happening in a lot of other countries. That's just a very small. But here, having said this, I'm like, more leaning towards the advantages, and I do recognize the advantages of like a globalized regime. But here, like, some of my like issues come. The first, like I said, this entire idea is premised that we have some shared ideologies and shared philosophies, and they converge at one point. So I actually, do think like this is very problematic, because I started with that example of global constitutionalism, the journal, and one of the most common themes about that journal is most comparative scholars, most constitutionalists, most internationalists warn about taking this discussion too far about shared ideologies. And again, I'll head to it why. It's very easy to say that, we as a world share certain characteristics. And perhaps it might be a good thing, but the underlying problem with this is it fails to recognize that different cultures exist. And perhaps, it's again, something like the right to life or the right to equality. Yes, perhaps that is something that should be applicable across systems. But the other debate is about cultural relativism. Once we go beyond some of the most standardly accepted things, everything else becomes problematic. And even things like right to life or right to equality, there's a very different understanding across systems. And again, I'll take another example about, so one thing that's happened in Africa in this like modern era of constitution making is because these were pretty much a lot of African societies after they ended with colonialization or be it conflict, etc. They didn't have a lot of potentially females who could be elected to legislators. So they used the entire process of reservation in legislature to ensure female representation. Now, something like this is not a model that is both accepted and desirable, say, in a Nordic country. So the thing is, sometimes these rights and things are relative, and it's not only hard, but it's dangerous to sometimes try and say that we have these shared common values and shared ways of doing things. And why problematic and dangerous is that as much as we want to see an equal regime in the world or anywhere in life, it doesn't happen. The idea is great. Like even in India, we want an equal society, but most of us know that that's and that's what we are really striving for. But it's very hard. And what the problem that happens with this is, when you don't, in a world that actually is never going to be equal, we want it to be equal, is that it will lead to certain ideologies being prioritized over other countries' ideologies, and that can again be problematic. That can lead to domestic backlash. And again, I'll go to the Afghanistan example. So the Afghanistan is kind of like, again, a micro example. What's problematic about this convergence of ideologies and philosophy. So in 2004, when the Taliban was kind of thrown out of Afghanistan, there were a lot of international actors involved in Afghanistan's peace process. There was a lot of UN agencies involved, a lot of countries like the United States of America, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, the entire NATO forces, they were all involved in Afghanistan. And they tried to come up with this constitution, which took the best of both worlds, both the Islamic world and the Western world. It tried to combine Western philosophy, Western liberal human rights philosophies with the traditional I would say, Islamic model of governance that has been prevalent in these countries. So something like the Afghanistan constitution, it recognized that Islam is their primary religion, but at the same time, it recognized an array of human rights. It's also stated a commitment to sign human rights treaties, to be part of international organizations, etc., etc., etc. So far, so good. Sounds great. You have a very powerful, at the end of the day, again, and that time, perhaps one of the biggest mistakes people did was yes, you had Taliban out, but you didn't have that ideology out of the country. A reason Taliban is as powerful as it is at the end of the day, people do support Taliban. And there are people who are ready to join Taliban in large numbers. We often, again, give a negative connotation to the Taliban. The Taliban is organized as a proper political party in Afghanistan. They have been since forever. It's just that they believe in a very extreme version of state and society. But their problems, since they've been back in power within 2-3 years of they being thrown out of the country. But one of their biggest grudges with everything that happened was actually their constitution. They felt that the constitution, which, like I said, was a kind of a balancing constitution, they felt that was too Western and is actually the biggest obstacle to peace in Afghanistan. So the entire grudge actually started with the way the constitution was, the way it tried to find shared ideologies and common philosophies. And that was a big problem. And that's something, you're now seeing with the rise of populist governments, with leaders like Viktor Orban, Recep Erdogan, all these, especially in the European Union, where they're trying to, again, come up with the shared ideologies. You're seeing this backlash, and even Poland, another example, where this backlash is coming from. So the point that I'm making is, once we go beyond certain core rights, it's very hard to come up with these shared ideologies that can exist across societies. And sometimes, thinking on those terms, and we often, when we think about these terms, we think from a very Western lens. it can be a little problematic at times. So that's the first thing. But I'll head back to something that I mentioned here later on. Now, the second thing is, which I think is potentially more doable, is a shared governance structure. And a shared governance structure, or a better governance structure at a global level, that is something the world constitution can kind of, I would say, remedify, because the UN system is very unequal. And it doesn't, again, it's kind of premised on the fact that there are a lot of problems with the working of the UN system. So if we have a world constitution, we can somehow remedify those things. We can have a more equal regime. We can set a system where decision making would be less political and more efficient. So those are some things that again, COVID pandemic, with the WHO, there are just so many things that can be criticized about the way the WHO reacted, and that's a great lesson that we can take away. So okay, I said all these things, and what is the point that I'm pretty much trying to make? The point that I'm trying to make is, firstly, that it's this is completely my opinion, that it's sometimes dangerous to think about at a very, very global level, that we can have a shared ideology. And again, we can agree on certain rights and certain things, but then we have the question that we have international treaties like the ICCPR, ICSCR, the the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights. And what would a world constitution do that these aren't doing? It does have certain, I would say, symbolic and aspirational purposes, but we really have to, think about that. How much more heavy lifting is it doing than what we actually have? Now, the second thing which I said is that so like I said, that is a problematic element. The second thing that I mentioned is we can have better governance structures, we can kind of, look at a different kind of regime, which would be more efficient to kind of address certain problems. And this is again another place like where we really have to ask that question, that do we need a radical reform of the current international system, which is what something like a world constitution would be doing, or is it possible to kind of reform the current system? I don't have an answer. Though I generally, I would definitely think that perhaps at a academic level, or at a, kind of when what this conference is doing, at a level where we think and we debate about certain things, we definitely should push for an entire new regime from scratch, because that's the best way to go about it. You can reform things as much as you want, but if like your fundamental bases are faulty, no matter how much reform you will do, you're never going to get there. And a lot of times, we can see this with the American society. A lot of people who call for fundamental reform of the American society, they say that the entire premise, the entire foundation of the American society was based on slavery, and that was one of the foundational sins. So any reform that we try to do, that's why we need kind of a radical reformation of the society. And these similar kind of arguments are made in different contexts. Same in the Indian context with issues surrounding caste and discrimination, etc. But I think at a practical level, it is hard, and we do need to kind of acknowledge that it is hard. Or perhaps not even hard, perhaps the United Nations itself and came across as a result of a lot of compromises, a lot of challenges, and at the back end of something that really needed an organization like the United Nations. That was the World War II. And the big problem is that the kind of challenges we're facing in the 21st century, perhaps like, we are not close to a third world war, but climate change, pandemics, biorisks, artificial intelligence, advanced technologies. These are more like the kind of risk that we are going to see going on. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of people aren't taking these as seriously as we want. So, really convincing people to pretty much reform an entire system because we have to deal with these threats in the current system, it's going to be incredibly hard. And it's not only hard, it's going to be very tough to address it at a global level when there'll always be one or two countries holding out. And and this leads me to like my final point, which, and I'll I promise I'll wrap up into 4 minutes. The best constitutions are and I mentioned the word holdout, so keep that in mind. So the best constitutions are the ones that are drafted very inclusively, where different voices in a society come together and they come up with something which benefits pretty much the whole, everyone in that society. Again, there are empirical studies that say that constitutions that are not drafted inclusively always fail. One of the main reasons for the success of constitutions like America and India, why they endured so long, was relative to a lot of other things, they were inclusive in their drafting. It would be wrong to say they were very inclusive. There were a lot of things about, when the American Constitution was drafted, there weren't any like women in the drafting committee. There was not a single Black person in the drafting committee. So they weren't like that way inclusive, but there were other aspects of it which made it inclusive. Same thing with the Indian Constitution. So a world constitution would be premised that it is inclusive of all countries, and that would be very hard to attain. Even we see at the United Nations level, China and America don't agree on anything. Pretty much nothing. Add Russia to this mix and the equation gets more complicated. Add India to the mix, another very big country, it even gets more complicated, because India is this like strange international actor that on certain things sides with Western blocs, but on certain things actually sides with non-Western blocs. They side with Russia, they side with China, especially issues like climate change. Climate change, India doesn't side with the West. Human rights, India somewhere in the middle. But India, with a country with 1.3 billion people, is important. So I'll just conclude with this point that, I do have my skepticisms about the benefits of, or rather, the benefits of ascribing that we have a shared ideology. I do, kind of recognize that a better global governance regime would be better. But there, my kind of skepticism is that outside academic debate, how realistic it is, because the road is just too long and too arduous. So where does this leave us? I think, as much as I hate to agree with this, I think it leaves us with really pushing, and that itself I know is going to be very hard, for like fundamental reforms of the international structures that we have. And that, like I said, that itself is going to be very hard. But if we kind of, and I started, speaking about that, the premise on which a world constitution is based is very important. At least, if we don't agree with everything, at least at least the premises that we need to tackle some of the most important problems that the world is facing. That premise is amazing. It's great. It's important. It's needed. So what we need to really start pushing towards is perhaps, or maybe that can be a great starting point even for a different regime, is let's try and at least in the short run, and by short run I mean a very short run, because some of these problems, especially something like climate change, we can't wait too long for it. So we pretty much need to start with this, to at least kind of start changing the global structures to address these issues properly, and then we can perhaps take it from there. So concluding with this, that there are certain things about the idea I like, and certain things I kind of have my reservations over, and largely I do have my doubts about the practicality of things. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a very important topic for discussion, for debate, and even advocacy. And there are certain aspects of it that we can take away from it to discuss and deliberate how to pretty much reform international structures. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you so much, and my apologies for going a little over time.
Thank you so much, sir, for an enlightening and enriching address. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the paper presentations. The general rules for the presentations are as follows. There will be 4 paper presenters in this session. Each presenter will get a total of 10 minutes to present their paper. Each presenter will have to mandatorily finish their presentations in 7 minutes, and the remaining 3 minutes will be reserved for questions and answers. Each presentation will be strictly timed by the moderators, and adequate warnings will be given to the presenters. With this, let us commence. Our first presenter is Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hayat and Dr. K. Sita Manikyam, and they'll be presenting on the topic a jurisprudential analysis of fundamental rights and directive principles vis-a-vis global world constitution. You can start.
So one, please unmute him.
Yes, yes, yes. Am I audible to you guys? Yeah. Hello, am I audible to you now?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the acknowledgement. Firstly, very good afternoon, and let me convey my hearty congratulations to the organizers that brought up this beautiful forum with a total of 3 day sessions. Now, without wasting the time, let me get back with the topic. The technical session for more of the philosophical approach. Therefore, I've been working on the jurisprudential analysis of the fundamental rights and directive principles, of course, with a touch upon the comparative assessment, the global world constitution. Now, I request the organizer to next slide, please. Yeah. Now, to start with my presentation, I'll just go with the first quotation because of the paucity of the time. That is, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very existence of the humanity, as given by Nelson Mandela, a very famous social activist and freedom fighter for South Africa. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, yeah. Now, I don't want to go much details about. We all know the basic tenets. It is a basic set of rights. These human rights are the basic set of rights, which is fundamental for all the citizens of their respective states. Nation states. So basically, human rights, okay, basic rights that guarantees certain form of freedoms to all the peoples of the world. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Now, in context to human rights, a very famous judge of Indian Supreme Court, Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, who stated human rights date back to the very dawn of human civilization and often appear clearly enshrined in great religions of the world. For example, one's duty towards neighbors, the concept of universal brotherhood, which is we call the fraternity in our preamble itself, and fraternity of mankind, doctrine of non-violence, the principle of dharma. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah. Now, this is where I'm going to draw my attention here. Attention that the two facets of the rights which are mentioned in the Indian Constitution. That is the two facet rights, which I mean to say the civil and political rights, that is fundamental rights, and also rights in the form of directives, which are known as the directive principles of the state policy. Now, these rights, fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, when it comes to Indian context, have gone through a tremendous phases of interpretation when it comes to the court of the apex court of law. The 3 phases, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. 1 being the strict interpretation of the law, second being the much more stricter interpretation of the law, and last being the liberal interpretation of the law in interpreting these 2 bundle of rights. Now, why I am emphasizing and how I'm going to connect, I'll come to that. Next slide, please. Yeah, yeah. Now, here is what the jurisprudential analysis. As we all know, the concept of justice, whenever we think about the concept of justice, there are 2 main heroes when it comes to the jurisprudential aspect. One being the John Rawls, his concept in his contribution in the theory of justice, and of course the latest jurist who has added to the list is the idea of justice by none other than the Dr.
Amartya Sen. Now, when we look into the John Rawls' concept of justice, in his masterpiece, Rawls proposed the conception of justice in the following, which I summarize in a very nutshell. Number one being that there has to be a maximization of the liberty, and there should be only certain form of a constraints, which is essential to protect the very liberty itself. Secondly, that there has to be equality of all, both in basic liberties of social life, as well as in the distribution of all other forms of the social goods. And finally, that there has to be fair and equality of opportunity and elimination of gross inequalities of opportunity based on discrimination. Now, this is one set of idea of, that is concept of justice. Now, when it comes to the idea of justice as propounded by Dr. Amartya Sen, in a nutshell, I can say the two basic terms, two very beautiful terms, which we define when it comes to justice, of idea of justice propounded by Amartya Sen, Niti and Nyaya. Niti and Nyaya. Next slide, please. Yeah. When it comes to justice, when it comes to the Indian Constitution, we have social, economic, and political justice emphasized in the preamble, as well as there are a set of articles 14, 15, 16, 19, and 21, 37, 38, 39, 39 capital A in the Directive principles. And the entire goal of these articles is to attain something called the social justice, that is to remove economic inequalities, to provide decent standard of living and working people, okay, to protect the interests of the weaker sections of the society and whatnot. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah, next slide. Hello. Yeah. Yeah, next slide. As I told you, when it comes to as a nation state India, the entire phase has been gone through the constitutional interpretation of fundamental rights and directive principles. One can understand, analyze, and thoroughly better understand in three phases. Phase one from A.K. Gopalan days to the ADM Jabalpur to the Maneka Gandhi days, and finally post Maneka Gandhi days. Okay, what we witness is the phase three, that is post Maneka Gandhi. What we witness is the liberal interpretation of these civil and political rights, coming to the rescue and protection of the individual citizen. Next slide, please. Yeah, fine. Now, I'll come to this slide, but I request the organizers to close this presentation for a moment. Close this presentation. Close this presentation, please. Yeah, just for a moment. Yeah, organizers, please minimize or close the presentation. I would like to come onto the screen. Yeah. Now, before I go to the last slide, okay, which talks about the important features of the world constitution and how the Indian constitution also, which has been heavily influenced on the drafting of the Indian constitution, has the impact due to the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, 1948. Now, here I would like to draw your attention. There are two incidents I would like to draw your attention. The two incidents is, one is Greta Thunberg. Greta Thunberg. I'm sure you know who is the Greta Thunberg. Okay. And second one is the George Floyd's incident. Greta Thunberg talks about the future sustainable rights. She talks about, emphasizes upon the future sustainable rights for all the global citizens, right? And when it comes to George Floyd, now I would like to know, like, I don't know whether with the permission of the chair, may I ask, like, who is George Floyd? Can I ask? Like, okay, it's okay, fine. I'll get back to you. I'm sure you all know there is something like Black Lives Matters movement. And in the recent time, almost all the sports person, before commencing of the match, they are doing some formality that is called Black Lives Matters, a vow that is being done. What I'm trying to draw your attention is, like, there are certain set of rights which either you may be any nationality, you may be from the state of Bangladesh, state of what we call Turkey, it doesn't matter, but these are some of the rights which is common for all the fellow citizens across the world. When we all stood for the Black Lives Matters movement, when we all supported the Arab Spring, I'm sure you know Arab Spring way back in 2011, when all the Arab Middle East countries, they fought, they strived for the democratic rights. They no longer wanted the totalitarian state, totalitarian system. They wanted the democratic right. Okay, I'm coming to. I'm going to wind up. I can see in the chat box. Okay, I request the organizer now. You switch to the slide, please. Slide. Yeah. Slide, please. Just one slide. That is sufficient. Yeah, I request the organizer to switch to the slide. Hello.
Just a second.
Yes. Yeah. Last. Yeah, that one. Yeah, this one. So these are some of the interesting features which are present in the Constitution. Okay, in a way, if you look into the list of freedoms and compare it with the UDHR, ICCPR, SEDA, even European Convention of Human Rights, these are some of the set of freedoms and rights which are equally applicable to all the people of the world. It is not necessary to be confined to one nation state. For example, liberty, equality, fraternity, freedom of speech and press. Okay, so basically what I am trying to draw your attention here is like, one can rely on the famous statement made by Thomas Jefferson. I want the organizer to go to the last slide, last but one slide. Yeah, that one, that's the quotation. Okay. This is a concluding note. Okay, yes, we can, the time has come when we are worried about sustainable rights, sustainable development. Even the Supreme Court of India in ND Jal versus Union of India has said a right to sustainable development is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Okay, so it is high time that we can unify together to come to a common consensus. Okay, because resources are limited, our resources are being exhausted. It is time we should all think over to form a common brotherhood, common fraternity, and perhaps one can rely on Thomas Jefferson's idea on how important these rights and how important the state's responsibility. In the similar manner, once the world constitution comes to the place, okay, the world bodies, okay, must facilitate what we call a common ground with all these basic rights to the fellow citizens. Okay. Yeah, I thank the organizers. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for that presentation. Our next presenter for the session is Mrs. Sanvi Deshmukh, who will be presenting on the topic Impact of International Convenience on Globalization, a Step Towards the World Constitution.
Ketan,
Mrs. Sanvi Deshmukh?
Please unmute her. Yes, Harshal, please unmute her.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. So, good evening, one and all. Myself, Mrs. Sarnavi Deshmukh, Assistant Professor, BS College of Law, Chembur, Mumbai. Before I start with the paper presentation, I would like to congratulate and thank Asmita ma'am and the entire GLC team for organizing such a wonderful and a systematic webinar. In this, you have gathered like eminent jurists from all over the world. So you have given us an opportunity opportunity to hear and share our views in front of all these people. So thank you very much, ma'am. So moving towards my paper, the title of the same, which I have taken, is International Covenants. The impact of international covenants on globalization, a step towards world constitution. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So in this particular paper, in the introduction of the paper, I have introduced the meaning of the term constitution. The term constitution is derived from the word constitute, which can be meant as to come together and form an organization. So the term constitution can be referred as a systematic rule book of any organization, or here to refer to the constitution of the country, we can say the systematic rule book of any country. What would be the object of the constitution? That is also been referred in the paper, like to form a rule book of the country, to empower and restrict the officials differently, and to protect the rights of the individual. If I take you to the research scholars that they have presented, that how constitution works for us, and with reference to Indian constitution, they have given us a very nice view as to we all are working systematically only because of the constitution that we have. Next slide. Here, to talk about world constitution, it is very important to look back for the historical background of the 20th century. 20th century being a very important era wherein we all have seen, I would not say witnessed, but we all have studied in the history about World War I, World War II, then the League of Nations, which tried controlling all the nations through their systematic views, but somewhere they failed. So United Nations Organization, which came after World War II, 1939, that was in 1945, through which, where people have lost their hope towards the third world, wherein people were discussing that if we go on for the third world war, it would be an end of the war. But through United Nations Organization, we could control that third world war, and then it got diverted into Cold War. And then I would say the Magna Carta of human rights, the birth was given to the humanity. Human rights were protected in the name of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which came in the year 1948. So 1948 is the time when all over the world, the rights of the human beings were taken into consideration. Throughout the world, all the countries, they were thinking about the rights of their nationals, and all those powers, they were working over the same. But for the first time, all over the world, we could see that for the first time, the human being were taken into consideration. If you move on to the next slide, here, here we have taken the example of our very own constitution, that is Indian Constitution. Because as we all have studied Indian Constitution, we all know what it is. We could see the impact of the Constitution on any nation. So India got its independence in the year 1947 and then decided to have a democratic country. So the Indian Constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly of India on 26th November 1949. So far 26th November, we celebrate that day as Constitutional Day. And then it got effective on 26th January 1950. So the Constitution replaced the Government of India Act 1935 as the country's fundamental governing documents, and the dominions of India became the Republic of India. So here we could see in India, Constitution is always referred to be the mother of all laws. The importance was given to Article 13. It says that if any law, by any chance, any law is said to be inconsistent with the fundamental rights of the Constitution, then that law be declared as invalid. So, as it was quoted by earlier scholar, that A.V. Dicey's rule, supremacy of the law and the spirit of the law. The Constitution then became the spirit of the law. So here it is said that the document lays down the framework that demonstrates fundamental political code, structure, procedure, powers, and duties of government institution, and sets out the fundamental rights, directive policies, and the duties of citizen. So far it has been seen and observed that it is one of the longest constitution in the world. As the next slide, I have referred about the features of the Indian Constitution, which we all know that I will not go through now due to the paucity of the time. But then, in the features of Indian Constitution, which we all have studied, which we all have seen, that the Constituent Assembly have studied the constitution of various countries and then have adopted the features of the other constitutions which are suitable to our country. And so far, in the last 73 years, we could see that it is said to be successful. We could still sustain our independence, we could still sustain the democracy. So the very what to say, the object of the constitution has been fulfilled so far. Now to talk about international law, which I have taken it further as to what is, if you could go to the next slide. Yes, international law and its covenants. So the very topic of my paper is the impact of international covenants. So if you could see that UDHR was one of the first international covenant which started. India became a signatory to the same, and afterwards the series of covenants have come up. Now here, many countries, those who have been the signatory to it, they have adopted all the features or all the points which have been discussed and accepted at international level.
Excuse me,
So,
ma'am. Sorry
yes,
to interrupt, but your time is up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My time is up. So here, just 1 minute, that I will conclude that the impact of international covenants on globalization is such that we could conclude here that we all are ready, all the countries are ready to have one single rule book of the countries of the world, that is world constitution. So that is what I was about to say, that the impact of international covenants on globalization, a step towards the world constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that presentation. Our next
Thank you.
presenter for the session is Professor Dr. Mohammad Sahib Hussain and Bernard Ottino, who will be presenting on the topic World Constitution and Sustainability of Individual Rights and State Sovereignty.
Yeah, you be on now. You be on now. Yes, you speak now. Speak.
Any technical problem? Harshal,
Yes, ma'am.
is there any technical problem from his side?
I
My
think it's
student
not from our
will-
side.
Unmute Bernard Ottino.
His
Yes,
audio is
Bernard.
not connected. His audio.
Bernard Atino, no, he joined. I told him to join.
Yeah,
Because he doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the
He
power.
has joined. He has joined. Kindly ask him to rejoin because his audio is not connected.
The audio is not connected. I will call him. I will call him.
Can we take another presentation till he joins?
Yeah, he will join. Yes. Then I will tell him to unmute it. Because I told him because he doesn't have the power in the laptop.
Yeah, sir, no
That's-
problem. We'll go ahead with another presenter.
Presentation.
After that, we'll take his presentation.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, madam. Continue it, madam.
Okay, our next presenter for the session is Mr. Pramod Shinde, who is presenting on the topic World Constitution Expanding Horizons of the World Democracy. Mr. Pramod Shinde.
He is not in the meeting.
Yes, Kritika.
I think he's not in the meeting. I'm trying to contact him.
Please.
Did Bernard sir rejoin?
It being a common paper, even Muhammad Sahib Hussain sir can also present it.
You come on the line. You join it. Unmute and you join. Yeah, you join and unmute it. Unmute and then you start your presentation. Oh. Wait. Why you are taking that much time? Madam, you on it. I will present it, madam. No matter, because I don't want to kill the time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go
Yes,
ahead
sir,
with
that
the
will be better.
Yeah, you keep the slide. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a joint publication between me and my student from the Tanzania, that the World Constitution on the sustainability of individual rights and state sovereignty. Of course, names I made it very much clear. Next. Yes, this is the next year. There is an outcome that I made it, the presentation outcome, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you can see it on the screen also. Next, go to the number. Next. Yes. And the World Constitution, the acronym that I put is WC, like any other international instrument, suffer a blow of lack of enforceability at the international level. It is the constitutional framework of individual rights and the state sovereignty around the world. Many countries would be the member to the WBC, and the circumstances that is incompatible with the state constitution sovereignty and not permitted with the individual liberties and freedom of speech and expression. And next. And historical backgrounds, everybody said it, but here we made another point here. Chicago Chancellor Hutchins stresses the necessity of the world government. Richard M. McKinnon and G.A. Burgess marked to the Chancellor asking for the financial and the moral support to frame WC, that is our Constitution Hutchins. They will support on the 16th September 1945. But in another meeting also I made it clear that the concept has come from the Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Next. Yeah, what is the Constitution and what is the WC? And earlier presenter made it very much clear that the Constitution and its definition and object also, and the way the World Constitution and the members are coming on the one platform to have a peaceful life. Next. Yeah, this is the W versus individual rights. Because when an individual right is, we are having Article 14, Article 16, Article 20, Article 25, these are things which we say that the liberty will be given over there, and especially Article 19 does with the many other things, and the Pandora box is Article 21, and how the rights will be there. The same right will be available when the Constitution of the WC is made. Next. The concept of the WC and state sovereignty. Yeah, how the World Constitution is compatible with sovereignty or not, because now India or any other countries has the sovereignty will be there. But once it comes on the same platform, then definitely there will be harmonization will be there and sovereignty will be diluted. Next. Challenges in enforcing the individual rights of state sovereignty. And some of the challenges I may be over there, but here the challenges may be for these are the language and faith, freedom of right, freedom of speech, expression, privacy, right to move, bringing them all on the platform in a real Herculean task. Yes, it's a Herculean task. The author cannot say it's impossible, but it can attain with a strong determination by harmonizing and following the many issues. The second aspect of the concept of the non-state interference with the internal affairs of the country, with the state parties struggle to retain the individual sovereignty. Whoever a problem arises, they will try to disguise themselves under the sovereignty of the state concept in order the provision of the world constitution not to interfere with their state affairs. That means don't mess with that sovereignty. Yeah, conclusion, the part maybe in the document is no enforced. It's so enforced, not no enforced. So enforced being really meaning of the global citizenship, it will shape the global governance. However, the only problem to remain unsolved is the IOD enforcing the WC is the struggle for the state, wanting to maintain their constitutional sovereignty with the world being in a fragmented shape, the failure of the fully implementation of some major international instruments like the UN Charter is also having the blow of the implementation. Yes, next. These are the recommendations which I made it over there. The right of the individual and the group have to be addressed to narrow down the gaps and see that the conflicts are needed reduced in WC by keeping the provision of the smooth running of the individual, society, and government in an amicable manner to attain the concept of the world is only one family that is able to become. The state sovereignty shall not be state and thus harmonized to keep the maximum advantage to all in the sphere of the government, machinery, administration, structure, and enforcement too. Thank you very much, madam. Yes, Anchor, because I want to give the chance to my student to whom I started in Tanzania, but anyway, there's a problem of the electricity would be there. That's why the battery is diminished. Then he closed it. Then I started this particular time. But anyway, I compensated with my bullet train speed.
So there's a question for you.
Yes, tell me, madam.
According to you, which is the most important provision of the world constitution, which can be named as the heart and soul of the same?
Yeah, but here the heart and the soul of the citizen, there is no, of course, the drafting only is only the Ethiopian task. There is no such an article to say that like Article 14, 19, 21, the Indian Constitution is having over there. But if there's such a manner they will drafted it over there, naturally that we do also have the article. Because as you know that the best constitution in the world is the Indian Constitution. And if any constitution is made over there, because it's taken from the many other countries and see that it's a model to the world. Yes.
We have 2 minutes left for questions. Does anyone have any other questions?
My Hayat is there, but he did not get the chance. Please give the Hayat for asking the question. Please, Hayat, you take my time.
If no questions are there, we can proceed further.
But anyway, madam, you are left to the organizer to deal according to your schedule.
So we'll move forward with our next presenter.
Harshin, no more present.
Okay, so Mr. Pramod Shinde cannot join due to some technical difficulties. So we'll move forward with the session. A very big thank you to all the participants for such informative paper presentations. I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce our chairperson for this session, Dr. Eugenia Almand. Dr. Eugenia Almand is Executive Secretary of the Provisional World Parliament and Chairperson of its Legislative Review Committee. She is the Secretary General of the World Constitution and Parliament Association, and is also on the board of the trustees of the Earth Constitution Institute Center in the USA. She has written and spoken about the World Constitution, its ratification, its implication since the 1980s. Without much ado, I call upon Dr. Eugenia Almand to kindly address the conference.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon to all of you. Jai Jagat. I would like to, I'll start off by letting y'all know, as Secretary General of World Constitution and Parliament Association and of the Provisional World Parliament, the history of the Earth Constitution, which is a specific among perhaps scores of constitutions that have been drafted as model constitutions. The Earth Constitution was drafted between in constituent assemblies, 4 constituent assemblies between 1968 and 1991 of a 25-member core team of drafters. It's recognized that there were 5 primary drafters, one of whom was Professor D.M. Spencer of Mumbai. Other drafters, Amara Singh from Sri Lanka and Mohammed Hossain of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. I would like to note that the Earth Constitution is a document that has some flavor of the constitutions of the subcontinent. I'm understanding of Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka, but also has many aspects of Western constitutions. It includes Bill of Rights and directive principles. We just this past December, we held the 15th session of a Provisional World Parliament to consider a number of world legislative bills. And in that parliament, we adopted what is a world district standards. And the world district standards reflect the Constitution as a whole. And so what we wanted to, first of all, I will point out that in the second article of our Constitution is a provision for 1,000 administrative and electoral districts. And the 1,000 electoral and administrative districts, part of that is so that there can be measured elections at a world level. If we're going to have a world constitution, a democratic world constitution with an electoral system, it will need to have measured elections, including measured referendums and measured initiatives, because everything cannot properly be held tightly within the parliament. It has to be something that the residents of the districts can participate in. This is hence provisions for referendum and provisions for initiative that is coming from the people to the parliament. So I had mentioned that there is a self-similarity between the 1,000 world districts, the structure and operation, the procedure of the 1,000 world districts, and the capital level of the World Federation under the Earth Constitution. Am I speaking too fast? I'm probably speaking too fast. The World Constitution, you can access this at a number of websites. One website is WCPA.global. I'll repeat that, WCPA.global. Another website where you can access, there's several, is oneworldrenaissance.com. oneworldrenaissance.com. Now, I said I was going to speak about Mumbai. Besides Professor D.M. Spencer, law professor of Mumbai, being a participant in the drafting of the Earth Constitution, I looked at the provisions in the legislation adopted in 2012 at the 8th session of the Provisional World Parliament, which met at Lucknow, India, Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, India. And the provisions included the plan of Dr. Hannah Newcomb and Ian Hackett. The Newcombs, Dr. Allen and Hannah Newcomb both, and Ian Hackett drew up the plan for 1,000 districts that was generally adopted at Lucknow in 2004. And at this session, that's this December 2021, meeting at the United Services Institution in New Delhi, India, via teleconferencing we met. It was hosted from there. We adopted the World District Standard, and looking at CONCAN has a number of I had a paper here and it's not right. Oh, here it is. Yes, I've got it right here. Please, if you will permit me. CONCAN is I'm understanding is a district of Maharashtra. And in the overall district of Maharashtra, there are, if we're having 1,000 world districts, the population of Maharashtra is such that 16 districts will fit in Maharashtra. There will be 16 districts. There will be 3 state representatives in addition to 16 members of World Parliament. 3 state representatives, that is under something that is called the World Federal Distinction weighting principle. There, in CONCAN itself, there will be 4 districts, or approximately 4 districts. That is, I think y'all have 72 lakh residents in, if I'm not mistaken, 72 lakh residents in CONCAN. That would be 4 world districts in CONCAN, with maybe a 50 lakh electorate, because those minors would only be, minors from 14 to 17 will only be voting with straw votes. And so about maybe 50 lakh adults. There are provisions in the legislation from this past December for sub-districts and judicial precincts, 5 sub-districts per world district, and in each sub-district, 2 judicial precincts. So that will be approximately 10 lakh electorate for the sub-districts. That's worldwide in sub-districts, about 10 lakh, more or less, and 5 lakh electorate for judicial precincts. And by bringing down the number of residents that are participating in the electoral processes through the districting, which is in our Constitution, provision for world districts, that 10 lakh electorate at the sub-district level with 5 sub-districts per world district, and then 10 judicial precincts per world district. It becomes a manageable process in which many residents or all residents of a world district, of a world sub-district, or a world judicial precinct will be able to participate in this process of moving the work forward. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to speak at the Law College. And if there are questions, please, I'm welcoming questions. Thanks again. We want to see, I think it would be called perhaps Prithvi Swaraj or Jagat Swaraj. That is home rule globally and liberty for humanity. I want to thank you very much. I'll close up again by saying, please, to see this particular world constitution of many models that have been drafted, this one we say is a founded constitution. We're actually working on it. We're encouraging people to study it and to actually take action with it. It's, you can go to WCPA.global and also you can go to oneworldrenaissance.com. Thank you. Jajakat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have Dr. Glenn Martin with us. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Glenn.
Martin, sir, welcome, sir.
Any questions to Dr. Eugenia, please?
Okay, well, keep in mind that we need people from the law colleges, and that the district requires, we need people that understand and want to work and see in world constitutional law. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind and inspiring words. I would now like to request everyone to please switch on their videos for a group photo. Okay, thank you, everyone. I now call upon Professor Ruta Veti to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ms. Ruta Veti, Assistant Professor at Government Law College, Mumbai. On the occasion of 3 days international conference on the topic World Constitution, a New Horizon of Human Rights, happening on 7th, 8th, and 9th of January 2022. In this today's last and fourth technical session titled World Constitution, the Culmination Point of Philosophies and Ideologies, I stand here to give a formal vote of thanks. Before I give a vote of thanks, I'd like to share the notion of ideology by Slavoj Žižek, a Slovenian philosopher and a cultural critic and Lacanian psychoanalyst. That here I quote that ideology is little more than ideas. Ideology also has a material component or something to support it, like an organization, and it also comes to interact in our social world, where it starts to feel natural. For Zizek, ideology is our reality. This makes it difficult to escape it. We are also blinded by it. We cannot really escape ideology, because ideology is society, according to Zizek. That how philosophy also look at ideology, but certainly not in totalitarian manner. So it's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of Government Law College, Mumbai, I'd like to extend my thanks to respected research person and the alumni of our college, Dr. Amal Sethi, Senior Fellow at University of Hamburg, Germany, for accepting the invitation and opening up this technical session with his scholarly engagement and opening the vistas for the further fruitful debates and discussions. I extend my thanks to all the paper presenters of this session, Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Hayatha and Dr. K. Sita Manikyam, Mrs. Sanvi Deshmukh, Professor Dr. Muhammad Sahib Hussain and Bernard Ontario, and Professor Pramod Shinde, but he, due to technical difficulty, he couldn't join us. for sharing their ideas and giving their knowledgeable inputs on the given sub-theme. I also extend my gratitude to the Honorable Professor Eugenia Almand for accepting the last-minute request to chair this session and concluding the entire session in a very precise manner. Thank you, ma'am, once again. And I also thank Professor Glenn Martin, sir, for his presence in today's session also. Well, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheel starts rolling months ago. It requires planning and a bird's eye for the details. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by our organizing secretary and respected principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidyam, ma'am, along with the team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues, convener, Assistant Professor Nuzat Sheikh Afroz, ma'am, and the co-convener, Assistant Professor Kritika Temunikar. From the bottom of my heart, I thank all of them. I also thank the organizing committee consisting of all my learned colleagues at Government Law College for their constant guidance, who know their job and are result oriented. I further would like to thank all the participants. Let me call it a fraternity of scholars here together for gracing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions from yesterday's, which will carry forward till tomorrow. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to teaching, non-teaching, technical, and Students' Council for their continuous support for the proper engagement of this conference. Thank you very much.
And special thank to Murthy sir for continuously cooperating.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Professor Modi.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for such a kind vote of thanks. A very big thank you to Dr. Amal Sethi and Dr. Eugenia Almand, all the presenters and participants, for making this session a grand success. We will now reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. IST for the 5th technical session.